My husband left the entire inheritance to our son, who kicked me out of the house. All I had left was an old garage, until I saw what was inside. I never imagined the worst day of my life would become the catalyst for my rebirth. But let me start where it truly began, in that cold conference room at the law office, where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the air conditioning made me pull my cardigan tighter. I was 52 years old, recently widowed, and about to discover just how little I apparently meant to the man I'd spent 3 decades beside. The attorney cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. My son sat across from me, his leg bouncing impatiently, checking his phone every few seconds. He'd barely looked at me since the funeral 3 weeks ago. "To my beloved son," the attorney began, and I watched my boy's face light up with anticipation. "I leave the penthouse apartment at Riverside Towers, the investment portfolio, the vintage car collection, and all associated monetary accounts." My son's grin widened. 19 years old, fresh out of college with a business degree, and now suddenly wealthy beyond imagination. He didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. The attorney continued, "To my wife of 30 years, I leave the property located at 847 Industrial Boulevard, the detached garage structure and all contents therein." Silence crashed over the room like a wave. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "The garage on Industrial Boulevard. Your husband purchased it in 2011. "A garage?" The word felt foreign in my mouth. "That's all?" My son laughed, actually laughed. Not warmly, but something sharp and dismissive. Looks like Dad knew who the real winner was. I turned to stare at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. "Excuse me? Come on, you haven't worked in what, 15 years? You barely understand how to use your smartphone. Meanwhile, I'm building my future." Dad obviously saw which one of us could actually handle wealth. Each word was a calculated strike. "I gave up my career to raise you," I said quietly, hating how my voice trembled. "Yeah, well, maybe that's why you ended up with a garage." He stood, pocketing his papers. Dad was always practical. He gave valuable assets to someone who could appreciate them. No offense, but offense was precisely what he meant to give. I sat frozen, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had gone white. How had we arrived here? I thought back to the computer science courses where I'd met my husband 33 years ago. We'd been lab partners, both fascinated by technology, spending late nights debugging code and dreaming about the future. He'd loved my analytical mind. "You see the invisible," he'd told me once. Then came marriage at 22, then pregnancy at 33, then the decision. His career was established, mine was climbing, and someone needed to be home. Just for a few years, we'd promised each other. But years stretched. School became middle school, became high school, and somehow my few years became 15. My programming skills grew rusty. The technology I'd once mastered evolved beyond recognition, and I found myself increasingly lost in conversations about frameworks that hadn't existed when I'd last worked. I became the woman who managed the household, who volunteered at school events, who supported her husband's long hours by ensuring he never worried about dinner or laundry. I became background music in my own life, and now, apparently, I'd become someone worth only a garage. "The keys indeed are in this envelope," the attorney said gently, sliding a manila packet toward me. My son was already at the door. "I'll need you out of the apartment by next week. I'm having it renovated. Fresh start, you know? Out, that's my home. Our home. It's my apartment now. Dad's will was clear." He turned, and the coldness in his eyes made me flinch. "Look, I'll give you 2 weeks. That's generous. But I can't have you living there while contractors are working." I left that office in a daze, clutching my envelope. 2 weeks to pack up 30 years of marriage. 2 weeks to figure out where to go, what to do, how to survive. The garage. I didn't even know where Industrial Boulevard was. Pulling out my phone, I typed in the address. 23 minutes away, in an older industrial area near the waterfront. I'd never heard my husband mention it. 15 years he'd owned this property, and he'd never said a word. Inside the envelope was a single key, heavy and old-fashioned, attached to a simple ring. No note, no explanation, just a key to a building I'd never seen. As I pulled onto the street, heading toward Industrial Boulevard. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving away from one life and towards something else entirely. Something that would either break me completely or teach me who I'd been before I became someone easily dismissed and forgotten. The key was cold against my palm, and somewhere ahead, in a garage I'd inherited like a consolation prize, lay answers to questions I hadn't known to ask. The 2 weeks of grace my son had grudgingly offered evaporated in less than 48 hours. I'd returned from the law office to find him already measuring walls in what had been our master bedroom. He had blueprints spread across the bed where my husband and I had shared 30 years of nights. The casual violation of it made my stomach turn. "You're still here?" He didn't look up from his tablet. "I thought you'd want to get started packing. You said 2 weeks. I set my purse down on the dresser. It's been less than a day." "Yeah, about that." He finally glanced up without a flicker of remorse. "The designer I hired can start immediately, this weekend, but she needs the place empty, completely empty, so you need to expedite your timeline." "Expedite my timeline," I repeated slowly. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" He shrugged. "I don't know. A hotel? That garage Dad left you? You'll figure something out. You managed to figure out how to be a housewife for 15 years, so this should be easy." The cruelty was so casual it took my breath away. This was the child I'd rocked through nightmares, driven to soccer practice, helped with college applications. "I gave up my career for you," I said quietly. "You gave up because you couldn't hack it." He set the tablet down, giving me his full attention in a way that felt threatening. "Be honest. The tech world was moving too fast. You were falling behind even before you got pregnant. The whole sacrificing for family thing was just a convenient excuse." Each word was precisely calibrated to wound. And it worked. Because buried under the rage was a tiny, terrible voice that whispered, "What if he's right? Look at you," he continued. "You don't understand cryptocurrency, blockchain, or even how modern investment portfolios work. Dad tried explaining his projects for years, and you just smiled and nodded like he was speaking another language." I thought about those evenings when my husband would come home excited about some new development, and I'd listen while folding laundry. He'd use terms I didn't recognize, reference platforms I'd never heard of, and yes, I'd smiled and nodded because after managing a household all day, I didn't have energy to ask for translations. When had I stopped asking questions? When had I accepted my own irrelevance? "The garage is basically worthless," my son continued, pacing like a prosecutor. "You know what's in that neighborhood? Abandoned warehouses. Dad probably bought it as some weird nostalgia thing. You know how he was about old junk, convinced everything vintage would be worth something someday." He laughed. "Meanwhile, I've got a penthouse worth $3 million, an investment portfolio that's going to set me up for life, and Dad's car collection." He knew what real assets were. He gave them to someone who'd appreciate them. "And you think you appreciate them?" I asked, finding some fragment of spine. "You, who've never worked a real day in your life?" "I'm educated. I understand modern economics and digital finance. I'm not stuck in some outdated mindset." Dad recognized that. He invested in the winner, as if life was a competition and I'd lost by loving my family. "I need you out by Friday," he said with finality. "The designers team starts Monday. You can take your personal items and any furniture from the guest room. Everything else stays. That furniture, we bought that together. And now it's mine. That's how inheritance works." He picked up his tablet again, dismissing me. "I've already hired movers for whatever you don't take. Storage unit information will be texted to you." "Friday," I repeated numbly. "Friday. Oh, and the building manager needs your keys by Friday afternoon. I've already notified them your access will be revoked as of 6 p.m. Revoked, like I was a security threat, rather than someone who'd lived here for a decade. I walked out without another word. In the kitchen, I made coffee with shaking hands. My laptop sat on the counter. I opened it and pulled up the address again. 847, Industrial Boulevard. Street view showed a nondescript building with rolling doors, but my husband had bought it 15 years ago and never mentioned it. That meant something. My phone buzzed with a text. "Storage unit NUF 247 at Westside Storage. Code 4832. Clock starts Friday 6 p.m. Not even pretense of courtesy. just logistics and deadlines. I looked around the kitchen where I'd spent so many hours, the window where I'd watched seasons change, the table where we'd eaten thousands of meals, all of it about to belong to someone else. The key sat in my purse, heavy with implication. If I only had 3 days before I was homeless, I needed to know what I actually owned. Because despite everything, I couldn't quite believe the man who'd loved me for 30 years had left me with nothing but a cruel joke. Industrial Boulevard looked exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. I pulled up to 847 just as afternoon shadows stretched across cracked pavement. A few buildings showed signs of life, but most wore the defeated look of places time had forgotten. My garage sat between a vacant lot and what appeared to be a closed auto body shop. Gray cinderblock walls, standard rolling door, one small dirty window. No signs except a faded 847 painted above the doorframe. This was my inheritance. I sat in my car for a long moment, key in hand. My phone showed 3:47 p.m. In 2 hours, my access to the apartment would be revoked. Everything I hadn't packed into my car would go into storage, where it would sit like evidence of a life that didn't matter anymore. The key was cold against my palm, heavy, old-fashioned in a way that seemed deliberately chosen. I got out. The air smelled like rain and rust and emptiness. The lock was newer than expected, good quality, recently installed. The key turned smoothly, well-oiled. The rolling door lifted with surprising ease. Inside was darkness and clean, circulated air. I found a switch. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing a space that made no sense. The garage was empty. Completely empty except for a single wooden table in the exact center of the room, positioned with geometric precision. Not a workbench, not storage, just a simple table, about 3 feet square, standing alone in a space that could have held 2 cars. The floor was clean, not just swept, but actually clean, the concrete sealed and unblemished. The walls were painted neutral gray. In one corner sat a dehumidifier, plugged in and humming quietly. In another corner, I noticed what looked like air purifiers, also running. Someone had been maintaining this space. Someone had been protecting it from moisture, from deterioration, from time itself. And in the center of that pristine table sat a single metal box. I approached slowly, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The box was industrial grade, the kind designed to withstand water, impact, maybe even fire. About the size of a large shoebox, made of brushed steel with reinforced corners. On top of the box, secured with clear tape, was an envelope with my name written in my husband's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The paper was thick, expensive. Inside was a single card with just 4 words. Our first date, remember? A combination lock secured the metal box. 6 digits. Our first date. I closed my eyes, thinking back 33 years. We'd met in January during spring registration, but our first actual date had been 3 weeks later. February 14th, Valentine's Day. Though he'd insisted it wasn't about the holiday, he just finally got the courage to ask. February 14th, 1992. I tried. EO21492. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, nestled in custom-cut foam padding, were 3 items arranged with obvious care. First, a small electronic device, maybe 4 inches long, with a tiny screen and 2 buttons. It looked like a specialized piece of hardware, something purpose-built. A USB port on one end, clean, protected, deliberately preserved. Second, a card made of steel, actual steel, about the size of a credit card, but thicker, heavier. Engraved on it in small, precise letters were 12 words, not sentences. Just 12 random-seeming words. Venture, timber, fox, meadow, castle, orbit, ripple, acoustic, margin, dolphin, prison, feature. Third, beneath both items, a letter. Multiple pages, folded carefully, written in my husband's hand. I lifted the letter with trembling fingers, my computer science degree from decades ago suddenly whispering recognition. That device, the construction, the minimal interface, the careful offline storage, that steel card with seemingly random words. This wasn't random. This was a system, a security protocol, something designed to protect valuable data from digital threats by keeping it completely offline. I'd seen similar concepts in my coursework back when we were just beginning to understand the implications of digital security, before I'd left that world behind, before I'd forgotten that once I'd been someone who understood these things. The letter crinkled slightly as I unfolded it, and I recognized that sound. Archive-quality paper, acid-free, meant to last. Everything about this setup spoke of long-term planning, of someone who understood preservation, of someone who'd been protecting something precious. The first line of the letter read, "My dearest, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I can finally give you back what you sacrificed." I sank down to sit on the clean floor, my back against the wall, the letter clutched in my hands. Around me, the dehumidifiers hummed their quiet song of preservation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and in that sterile, carefully maintained space, I began to read the words my husband had left for me, words that would explain why a garage was worth more than any apartment, any car collection, any inheritance my son could possibly imagine. I read the letter 3 times sitting on that garage floor before the magnitude truly hit me. $20 million, not in some future possibility, not in stocks that might grow, in digital currency already purchased, already owned, already waiting. All I had to do was access it. My hands shook so badly I had to set the pages down. My husband had thought of everything: temperature control, moisture prevention, secure location. Even the lock combination was a test, making sure only I would open this. At the bottom of the metal box was another envelope. Inside, a business card, a name, a secure email, a phone number. Beneath it, a handwritten note. "He expects your call. Code word, Byzantine." Byzantine. The Byzantine general's problem: how to achieve consensus in a distributed system. It was a test, proof that I was who I claimed to be. My phone showed 5:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, my access to the apartment would be revoked. In 13 minutes, I would officially be homeless. Except I wasn't homeless. I was sitting in a garage worth $20 million. I gathered everything carefully and drove to a hotel near the airport. Not fancy, but clean and anonymous. Somewhere I could think. That night, I fell into research the way I used to in college. Laptop open, multiple tabs, notepads filling with questions. The muscle memory of learning returned immediately. Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptographic keys, distributed ledgers. The terminology was new, but the underlying concepts weren't. Hash functions. We'd studied those. Public key cryptography. Familiar. Merkle trees. I remembered data structures. It was like reading a language I'd once spoken fluently. The grammar had changed, but the logic underneath was exactly what I'd learned 25 years ago. By 2 a.m., I understood enough to be dangerous. By 4 a.m., enough to be careful. And by dawn, I understood why my husband had trusted me with this. This wasn't about being tech-savvy. It was about understanding systems thinking, following logic chains, recognizing patterns. All the things I'd been good at before I convinced myself I wasn't smart anymore. I waited until 9 a.m. to make the call. "This is a secure line," a calm voice answered. "I was given this number. The code word is Byzantine." A pause. "I've been expecting your call. I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a very thoughtful man. He left me something. I need help understanding how to access it safely." "I know what he left you. We've been in contact for 5 years preparing for this. Before we proceed, I need to verify your identity. Can you tell me the first word on your recovery seed?" I glanced at the steel card. "Venture? Good. And the last word? Feature. Excellent. Now, I need you to understand something very clearly. Those 12 words give complete access to your funds. Never type them into any website, never share them with anyone except me in secure conversations. Never photograph them. If anyone gets those words, they can steal everything. Do you understand?" My computer science training kicked in. Because the seed phrase generates the private key, and possession of the private key is possession of the funds. There's no password recovery, no customer service. The mathematics don't care who has the key. A surprised pause. "Your husband said you'd understand quickly." He was right. Over the next hour, we discussed security protocols, verification methods, and safe ways to eventually convert some digital currency into traditional funds. He explained how to use the hardware device, how to verify transactions, how to protect myself from scams targeting cryptocurrency holders. Your husband's timing was remarkable, he said. He bought at $3 per unit in 2011. Current price is approximately $42,000. That's a 14,000% return. 14,000%. On an investment everyone had called worthless. Start slowly, he advised. Convert 10% to traditional currency and establish yourself. Learn the systems, then make decisions from stability rather than desperation. Your husband set this up so you'd never have to rush. After we hung up, I sat in that hotel room, looking at the device and steel card and my research notes. My son would be at the apartment now, watching contractors tear out everything that reminded him of me. He'd be planning his renovated life, confident in his victory. He had no idea that the mother he'd dismissed as technologically incompetent had just spent 8 hours learning a new financial system. That the woman he'd mocked for not understanding modern investments now controlled more wealth than he'd ever see. But more than the money, more than the security, I'd found something I thought I'd lost forever. I'd found myself. The metal box contained more than just the hardware device and steel card. Beneath the main compartment, I discovered a false bottom secured by a simple latch. Inside were additional letters, each dated and sealed in plastic archival sleeves. I arranged them chronologically on the hotel bed. The earliest was dated 6 years ago, written just days after my husband's cancer diagnosis. The last was from 2 months before he died. Together, they formed a journal of his final years and the strategy he'd carefully built. The first letter began simply, "I have 6 months to live, maybe 12 if I'm lucky." The question isn't how to say goodbye. It's how to make sure my death helps rather than harms the people I love. He wrote about watching our son through high school and college, observing the transformation from sweet child to entitled young man. He'd noticed the obsession with appearance over substance, the need to display wealth rather than build it, the way our son measured success in social media likes and followers rather than genuine achievement. He lives on social media but doesn't understand the technology that powers it, one letter read. He posts constantly, but couldn't explain an algorithm to save his life. He wants everything that looks valuable without understanding what creates value. Another entry, dated 3 years ago. I tried discussing Bitcoin with him today. Told him I'd made an early investment that had grown substantially. He immediately wanted to know how to cash out and flip it. No curiosity about the underlying technology, no patience for long-term thinking, just immediate gratification. It confirmed what I already suspected. He's not ready for real wealth. It would destroy him. My husband had known. All those years, he'd known exactly who our son was becoming, and it had broken his heart. But there were also letters about me, observations that made my throat tight. I watched her help him with calculus homework last night. She worked through problems faster than I could, explaining concepts with perfect clarity. Then at dinner, when I mentioned my work project, she got that distant look, the one that says, "This isn't for me anymore." How did I let her forget she's brilliant? From 4 years ago. She organized all our documents today, created a system for tracking household expenses that's more elegant than software I've seen professional engineers spend months designing. She doesn't even realize she's still thinking like a computer scientist. She just thinks she's being organized. I want to shake her and tell her, this is programming. You're still solving problems. You just stopped calling it that. He'd seen me more clearly than I'd seen myself. The final letter, written 2 months before he died, explained his strategy with painful clarity. I've divided everything strategically. Our son gets what he values, the visible symbols of wealth, the penthouse he can show off on social media, the car collection he can photograph for his friends, the traditional investments he can brag about at parties, all things that require maintenance, responsibility, and maturity he doesn't yet possess. They'll teach him lessons through natural consequences. The apartment comes with high maintenance fees and property taxes he'll need to manage. The cars need expensive storage and insurance. The investments require patience and understanding of market cycles. I'm giving him exactly enough rope to either hang himself or learn to climb. Either way, he'll grow, or he'll fail on his own merits. But you, my love, You get the invisible wealth, the patient investment everyone dismissed as worthless, the technology you're smart enough to understand if you just remember you're capable of understanding it. I'm not rescuing you from our son's cruelty. I'm giving you the tools to rescue yourself. The Bitcoin isn't a gift or charity. It's a reminder. You sacrificed your career, but you never lost your mind. You stepped away from technology, but the way you think, systematically, logically, seeing patterns where others see chaos, that never changed. This inheritance is a test of character for both of you. Our son will show whether he can handle visible wealth responsibly. You'll show whether you can reclaim the identity you set aside. I believe in you. I've always believed in you. Even when you stopped believing in yourself. I set the letter down with trembling hands. Outside the hotel window, the sun was setting over the city. Somewhere across town, my son was celebrating his inheritance, confident that he'd won, that his father had recognized his superiority and worth. He had no idea that every single asset he'd received was actually a test, that the apartment came with responsibilities he'd never considered, that the investments would require patience he'd never developed, that his father had given him exactly what he needed, not comfort and validation, but challenge and consequence. And me? I'd been given something far more valuable than money. I'd been given permission to be myself again, proof that my husband had always seen past the housewife role to the woman underneath. Recognition that intelligence doesn't expire just because you take time away. The hardware device sat on the bedside table, small and innocuous. Inside it, secured by mathematics and cryptography, was enough wealth to never worry about money again. But the real inheritance was simpler and more profound. The knowledge that I'd never stopped being brilliant. I'd just forgotten to look. 3 weeks after opening that garage, I stood in my new home in Playa del Carmen, watching sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and gold. The house wasn't extravagant. 3 bedrooms, open floor plan, windows facing the water. But it was mine. Purchased outright with cash converted from a fraction of my Bitcoin. Following the specialist's advice, I'd converted exactly 10%, 50 units at $42,000 each. $2.1 million transferred into traditional banking with proper tax documentation. The remaining 450 Bitcoin stayed secured offline, protected by mathematics. The conversion process had been straightforward once I understood the mechanics. The specialist guided me through exchanges and transfer procedures. My computer science background made the technical aspects intuitive. I wasn't just learning cryptocurrency, I was remembering how to learn. That remembering changed everything. I'd enrolled in online courses on financial technology, blockchain architecture, and digital economics. Not because I needed to understand my inheritance better, but because I'd forgotten how much I loved learning, how satisfying it felt to encounter difficult concepts and achieve comprehension. The courses led to certifications. The certifications led to consulting opportunities. Within 2 months, I'd gone from dismissed housewife to advisor on cryptocurrency security for wealthy individuals. People paid me substantial fees to explain what my husband had left me, how to protect digital assets, verify transactions, avoid scams. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had mocked me as technologically incompetent. Now I was teaching millionaires how to secure their digital wealth. I'd also established traditional investments, diversified portfolios, real estate generating rental income, bonds providing stable returns. Not because I needed money, but because I'd remembered I was good at systematic thinking, at analyzing risk and reward. My phone rang. My son's name appeared. He'd been calling regularly, though never to ask how I was. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Where are you?" he demanded without greeting. "I went by the storage unit. Most of your stuff is still there. I took what I needed. The rest can stay. The 30-day deadline is coming up. If you don't claim it, it gets donated." "I know. That's fine." Silence. He hadn't expected that. "So where are you living?" "I'm settled. Don't worry about me." "I'm not worried. I just need to know for legal purposes. The estate lawyer needs a current address." I gave him the specialist's business address, a registered agent service that forwarded mail without revealing my location. No need to tell him I was living beachfront in Mexico. "Mexico?" His voice dripped with disdain. "What are you going to do there?" "Live. Learn, work, all the things I stopped doing. Work? Doing what? You haven't had a real job in 15 years. I'm consulting on financial technology and digital asset security. He laughed. That same sharp, dismissive sound. Right. Who's going to hire you for that? Several people already have. But I need to go. Was there anything else? Yeah, actually. I'm having cash flow issues. The apartment maintenance fees are higher than expected. And the property taxes are your responsibility, I interrupted gently. Your father left you substantial assets. Learning to manage them is part of growing up. I just need a short-term loan, $5,000. I'll pay you back. $5,000. Insignificant compared to my wealth, but giving it would teach exactly the wrong lesson. No, I said. No? Are you serious? I'm your son. Which is precisely why I'm saying no. Your father gave you everything you need to succeed. What you do with it is up to you. This is because of how I treated you, isn't it? You're being vindictive. I'm being a parent. There's a difference. I watched waves roll onto the beach. You need to learn that assets require responsibility, that wealth without wisdom leads to poverty. Your father understood that. So you're just going to let me struggle? I'm going to let you learn. Just like I'm learning. I hung up before he could respond. My hands weren't shaking this time, because somewhere in the past 3 weeks, I'd remembered something crucial. Love doesn't mean rescue. Sometimes it means letting people face consequences. Outside, the ocean continued its rhythm. Inside, I returned to my laptop where I'd been reviewing a consulting contract. Tomorrow, I had a video call with a client in Singapore. Next week, an online seminar on blockchain security. My son thought I'd moved to Mexico to hide in shame. He had no idea I'd moved here to rebuild myself in a place where no one knew the housewife I'd been, where I could become again the woman I'd forgotten, the one who solved complex problems, who understood elegant systems. The woman my husband had always known was still there, waiting to remember herself. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was preparing for a client presentation. Not from my son, but from someone I barely remembered, a young woman who'd been in his graduating class. I'm sorry to bother you, she began hesitantly. I got your number from the estate lawyer's office. I know we don't really know each other, but I'm worried about your son. He's in serious trouble. My stomach tightened. What kind of trouble? Financial. Really bad financial trouble. He won't talk to anyone about it. But some of us have pieced things together. She took a breath. I think someone needs to know before this gets worse. Over the next 20 minutes, she painted a picture that was somehow both shocking and entirely predictable. 3 months. That's how long it had taken my son to destroy his inheritance. It started with a business opportunity presented by someone he'd met at an exclusive club, a cryptocurrency investment platform promising to double money in 60 days through proprietary trading algorithms. My son had invested $200,000 from his portfolio without understanding that legitimate investments don't guarantee returns, and cryptocurrencies are volatile by nature. The platform was a classic pyramid scheme. It paid early investors with money from new investors, creating the illusion of profit. My son, seeing his account balance grow, invested more, then recommended it to friends, earning referral bonuses, then mortgaged the apartment to invest even larger amounts. By the time the platform collapsed, taking all the money with it, he'd lost over $500,000. But that wasn't all. He'd also fallen for multiple other scams. An NFT project that promised exclusive access to celebrity events. The celebrities didn't exist. A decentralized finance platform that was actually just stealing login credentials. A coin that claimed to be the next Bitcoin, created by scammers who disappeared with investor money. He kept posting about his investments on social media, she explained, making it look like he was this successful crypto trader. But he didn't understand anything about blockchain or security. He just saw the word crypto and threw money at it. The irony was staggering. While my son was losing hundreds of thousands to cryptocurrency scams, I was sitting on legitimate Bitcoin worth over 20 million, teaching others how to avoid exactly the traps he'd fallen into. There's more, she continued quietly. He's been borrowing money. Not from banks. They won't lend to him anymore. From people who call themselves private investors, but who are really just loan sharks. The interest rates are insane, and now they're pressuring him for payment. How much does he owe? I don't know exactly. But I heard him on the phone last week. He sounded scared, really scared. After the call ended, I sat in my sun-filled living room, staring at the ocean without seeing it. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. This was exactly what his father had predicted. The visible wealth given to someone without wisdom had evaporated like morning mist. But another part of me just felt sad. Sad that my son had learned nothing from watching his father's careful, patient approach to investing. Sad that he'd valued appearance over substance so much that he'd literally mortgaged his future for social media clout. Most of all, sad that the boy who'd once been sweet and curious had become a man who couldn't distinguish between legitimate opportunity and obvious fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "We need to talk. It's urgent." I stared at the message for a long time. This was the moment his father had anticipated, the moment when consequence met reality, the test of whether my son could grow from failure or would simply look for someone else to blame. And it was also my moment of decision. I had the resources to rescue him completely. $2.1 million in liquid assets, over $18 million in Bitcoin that could be converted. I could pay off every debt, clear every obligation, restore him to financial stability. But would that help him? Or would it simply teach him that reckless decisions have no real consequences? That there would always be someone to save him from himself? I thought about my husband's letters, about how he'd structured the inheritance as a test, about how he'd trusted me to be strong enough to let our son learn through natural consequences. I thought about the past 3 months, how struggling and learning and rebuilding had transformed me from someone who'd forgotten her own capabilities into someone who was thriving, how the challenge, not the rescue, had saved me. My son hadn't asked for help when he'd kicked me out, hadn't shown mercy when I'd had nowhere to go, hadn't demonstrated even basic human kindness when I'd been at my lowest. But more importantly, rescuing him now would rob him of the only teacher powerful enough to change him, reality itself. I typed my response. "I'm available to talk on Friday at 2 p.m., video call." Then I returned to preparing my presentation on cryptocurrency security, where I'd be teaching people how to avoid exactly the mistakes my son had made. Friday at 2 p.m., my son's face appeared on my laptop screen. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed, wrinkled shirt. The confident young man from the law office had been replaced by someone genuinely frightened. "Thanks for taking my call," he said, humility startling in his voice. "Of course. You said it was urgent." He took a breath. "I'm in trouble. Serious financial trouble. I made bad investments, and now I owe money to people who aren't patient about collecting." I heard. Someone reached out with concerns. His expression tightened. "People are talking about it? People are worried. There's a difference." He nodded, then steeled himself. "I need help. I need money to clear my debts and start over. I know I treated you badly. I know I don't deserve to ask, but you're my mother, and I don't know where else to turn." There it was, the moment his father had predicted. I looked at my son through the screen, this 19-year-old who'd thought he understood the world, who'd dismissed me as irrelevant, who'd kicked me out without mercy. "How much do you need?" I asked calmly. Hope flared in his eyes. 600,000 would cover everything, the loans, the mortgage, the penalties. $600,000. I had that multiple times over. I could write that check without affecting my security at all. "I can't give you that money," I said gently but firmly. The hope died immediately. Can't or won't. Won't. Not because I don't have it. Not because I don't care. But because giving it to you would be the worst thing I could do. The worst thing? His voice rose. "Do you understand what will happen if I don't pay these people? Then you need to contact law enforcement. If you're being threatened, that's a criminal matter. And tell them what? That I willingly borrowed from loan sharks? That'll go great. You made choices. Adult choices. Now you're facing adult consequences. I can't protect you from that. I'm your son, which is exactly why I'm saying no." I kept my voice calm. Your father spent decades building his expertise, decades of study, discipline, learning from mistakes. He didn't become successful through shortcuts or schemes. He earned it through patient, careful work. I leaned forward. "You're 19 years old. You've barely started your adult life, and you expect everything immediately. You thought you could outsmart the market, beat the system, find easy money. Now you want me to rescue you so you never have to feel the full weight of those choices. So you're just going to let me fail? Lose everything? I'm going to let you learn. There's a profound difference. I paused. I forgive you for how you treated me. I forgive the cruelty, the dismissal, the contempt. But forgiveness doesn't mean I rescue you from consequences. Real love sometimes means standing back and letting someone experience the results of their decisions. His face hardened. This is revenge. If I wanted revenge, I'd do nothing and say nothing. Instead, I'm telling you clearly, you have to fix this yourself. You have to negotiate with creditors. You might lose the apartment. That's a consequence. You might have to declare bankruptcy. That's also a consequence. You might have to start over with nothing. And that might be exactly what you need. How is losing everything what I need? Because right now, you're a long way from being even 1% of what your father was. He understood patience, discipline, genuine knowledge. You understand shortcuts and appearances. Until you close that gap through real effort, no amount of money I give you will help. You'll just lose it again. Tears formed in his eyes. So that's it? Your own son is in danger and you're going to lecture me? I'm going to trust that you're capable of more than you've shown. I'm going to believe that hitting bottom might finally teach you lessons that comfort never could. I softened my voice. You're smart. You're young. You can recover from this, but only if you do the work yourself. And if I can't, if these people hurt me, then you go to the police. You ask for help from proper authorities. You declare bankruptcy and accept legal protections. What you don't do is expect your mother to hand you $600,000 so you can avoid learning anything. He stared at me, and I could see the war behind his eyes. Desperate hope, growing realization, anger, and underneath, maybe the faintest recognition that I might be right. I can't believe you're doing this, he said finally. I know, but someday, maybe you'll understand that this is the most loving thing I can do. Your father knew it 6 years ago. I'm learning it now. The call ended shortly after. No dramatic goodbye, just a quiet disconnect as my son processed a reality he'd never expected. I closed my laptop and sat in silence, looking out at the ocean. My hands were steady. My conscience was clear. And somewhere, I hoped, my husband was proud of both of us. The son facing necessary consequences, and the mother finally strong enough to allow it. 3 days after our video call, my son sent a long text message. Angry, desperate, full of accusations. I read it carefully, then crafted my response with precision. I understand you're angry. I understand you feel abandoned. But I need to be very clear about what happens from here. There will be no financial rescue. Not now, not if things get worse, not ever regarding these debts. This is your situation to resolve. I continued. You have options. Negotiate with creditors. Many will accept payment plans. Consult a bankruptcy attorney. There are legal protections for situations like this. Contact authorities if threatened with violence. These are adult solutions to adult problems. My phone rang immediately. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. The third time I answered. Did you read what I sent? His voice was strained. These people won't accept payment plans. Then you need legal help, not my money. A bankruptcy attorney can help you understand your options and protections under the law. Bankruptcy? Do you know what that will do to my credit? My future? Yes. It will damage your credit for years, make borrowing difficult, close certain doors. I paused. It will also teach you that financial decisions have real consequences, that debt isn't abstract, that shortcuts have costs. You want me to suffer. I want you to learn. Suffering is sometimes how learning happens. I kept my voice even. Your father gave you exactly enough rope to either hang yourself or learn to climb. Right now, you're choosing to hang yourself, but you could still choose to climb. How am I supposed to climb out of $600,000 in debt? The same way millions rebuild after financial disasters. You start over. You get a regular job, not prestigious, not impressive, but one that pays. You live modestly. You work through bankruptcy proceedings. You learn that wealth isn't given, it's built slowly. A regular job, like working retail, food service? If that's what's available, yes. Your father started as a junior programmer making barely above minimum wage. He worked his way up through decades of dedication. You want to skip those steps and jump straight to success. Life doesn't work that way. So, while you're living in Mexico, I'm supposed to work minimum wage? The bitterness was thick, but I caught something else underneath. The first hint he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his situation. I'm not living at your expense. I'm living the life your father's planning made possible. Just as you were given the same opportunity. The difference is that I took time to understand what I was given. You took it for granted. That's not fair. You got Bitcoin. I got things that required actual management. Exactly. Your father gave you assets requiring skill, patience, and responsibility to maintain. He tested whether you were ready. You weren't. Now you have the opportunity to become ready. Silence. Then, what if I can't do this? What if I fail completely? Then you fail, and then you get up and try again. That's what growth looks like. Not success handed to you, but lessons learned through genuine struggle. You really aren't going to help me at all? I'm helping you right now by refusing to rescue you. I'm helping by being honest about what you need to do. I'm helping by believing you're capable of more than you've shown. I took a breath. But I will not give you money. I will not interfere with natural consequences. I will not rob you of the opportunity to build real character by making things easy. This isn't help. This is abandonment. No. Abandonment would be disappearing and never speaking to you again. This is love. Difficult love that trusts you enough to let you face the hardest teacher there is, reality itself. Another long silence. I don't know if I can do this. You don't know because you've never had to. But humans are remarkably adaptable when they have no other choice. You'll surprise yourself. And if I mess this up too, then you'll have learned something valuable about what not to do next time. Either way, you'll grow. That's the point your father understood. And I'm finally learning. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the space to struggle and grow on their own. The call ended without resolution. There was no tidy conclusion, no moment where my son suddenly understood. Real life doesn't work that way. Understanding comes slowly, through experience rather than explanation. I sat on my terrace, watching the ocean, thinking about boundaries, about how love isn't the same as rescue, about how the most difficult thing a parent can do is watch their child struggle and refuse to intervene. My son had accused me of cruelty, but cruelty would be giving him money and teaching him that reckless behavior has no consequences. Cruelty would be robbing him of the chance to discover his own strength. What I was doing was hard. It hurt. It went against every instinct. But it was right. His father had known it. And now, finally, so did I. 6 months passed without direct contact. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't check up on him through mutual acquaintances. I respected his space to either grow or fail entirely on his own merits. The silence was harder than I'd expected. Every maternal instinct screamed to reach out, to check if he was safe. But I remembered my husband's letters, remembered how he'd predicted this exact moment, the temptation to interfere, to soften the lesson, to rescue rather than trust. So I focused on my own life instead. My consulting practice had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. I was working with clients across 3 continents, teaching cryptocurrency security and digital asset protection. The woman mocked as technologically incompetent 6 months ago now charged $5,000 per hour for her expertise. But the work that meant most had nothing to do with money. I'd started mentoring women returning to technology careers after years away. Women who'd stepped back for family, for caregiving, for 100 valid reasons, and now felt obsolete. Women who'd forgotten they were brilliant. Every week, I met with 5 mentees via video calls. We discussed imposter syndrome, skill-building strategies, and translating life experience into technical competencies. I taught them what I'd relearned, that logic doesn't expire, that problem-solving abilities don't vanish, that stepping away isn't giving up. Watching these women rediscover their confidence reminded me of my own journey. Each one who landed a job felt like a small victory. I also established a foundation focused on financial literacy and technology education for young adults. free workshops on understanding investments, avoiding scams, and building wealth responsibly. Everything my son should have learned, but hadn't. I named it after my husband. His legacy wouldn't just be the fortune he'd left me, but the knowledge he'd valued, shared freely with people who needed it. I didn't invite my son to be involved. This wasn't punishment. It was recognizing that his journey was separate from mine. If he wanted to participate someday, after he'd grown, the door would be open. But I wouldn't force it. Occasionally, news reached me through indirect channels. The young woman who'd first called continued to update me, though I never asked. My son had lost the apartment. The bank had foreclosed after he'd missed mortgage payments. He'd declared bankruptcy, as I'd suggested. The process had been humiliating, she said, but he'd gone through with it. He was living in a modest apartment with roommates, working 2 jobs, one at a coffee shop, one doing evening cleaning at an office building. Nothing prestigious, nothing he could post on social media to impress anyone. Every time I heard these updates, my heart ached, but I didn't reach out, didn't offer help, didn't interfere, because this was exactly what needed to happen. My son was learning what work actually meant, what it felt like to be tired from physical labor, to count pennies, to choose between small luxuries. He was learning what his father had known, that wealth built on understanding is stable, while wealth without wisdom evaporates. He seems different, she told me during one update. Quieter, less arrogant. I don't know if he's broken or just growing up. Maybe both, I said. Sometimes breaking is how growing happens. I wondered if he thought about me, if he was angry still, or if he'd started to understand why I'd refused to rescue him. I wondered if he'd figured out that the mother he'd dismissed as poor was actually the one with real wealth. But I didn't wonder enough to break my silence. My husband had trusted his plan. Give our son visible wealth to test his character, give me invisible wealth to reclaim my identity. The test was still ongoing, and the most important thing I could do was stay out of the way and let results develop naturally. On my terrace in Playa del Carmen, I'd sometimes watch the sunset and think about the 2 paths diverging from that law office 6 months ago. My son walking toward struggle and hopefully growth. Me walking toward rediscovery and purpose. We'd both been given exactly what we needed. The foundation held its first workshop on a warm Tuesday. 25 young people attended, eager to learn about financial literacy and cryptocurrency basics. I taught them how to spot scams, understand compound interest, and build wealth slowly through patience. At the end, a 19-year-old raised his hand. Why are you doing this for free? I thought carefully. Because someone I loved taught me that the greatest wealth isn't money, it's understanding, and understanding is only valuable if you share it. As I said it, I thought about my son. Wherever he was, whatever job he was working, I hoped he was learning exactly that lesson, not from my lectures, but from the grinding, difficult teacher of real experience. The workshop ended, and I remained in the space, looking at empty chairs, thinking about all the ways we try to teach people we love. Some lessons can only be learned alone. Some growth can only happen in silence. Some love looks like absence, because presence would prevent the very transformation we're hoping for. 6 months of silence. It felt like forever. It felt like just the beginning. 3 years later, at 55, I stood in that same garage on Industrial Boulevard where everything had changed. I'd kept the property, though I'd never stored anything here again. It had become a memorial, a reminder, a place to return when I needed to remember who I'd been and who I'd become. The metal box was long gone, its contents distributed into secure storage solutions. The hardware wallet that had held $20 million in Bitcoin was now just one of many tools I used. The cryptocurrency markets had been volatile, but patience, that lesson my husband had understood, had served me perfectly. But I wasn't here to think about money. I was here to think about wisdom. My husband had seen something 3 years ago that I'd only begun to understand. The garage wasn't really about Bitcoin or hidden wealth. It was a message. You were always capable. You were always brilliant. Now remember, the inheritance wasn't $20 million. It was permission to be myself again. Proof that stepping away from a career didn't erase intelligence. That raising a child didn't diminish capability. That years away from technology didn't delete the fundamental way I thought. He'd given me back my identity. And our son? I still didn't know if he'd learned what he needed to learn. I'd heard through occasional updates that he'd finished bankruptcy proceedings, that he'd kept working 2 jobs for over a year before finding entry-level work at a tech company, in customer service, helping people understand basic technical concepts. The pay was modest, the work unglamorous, but it was legitimate, honest employment, requiring consistency and patience. Whether he'd grown into wisdom or simply learned to survive, I couldn't say. We'd exchanged exactly 3 emails in 3 years, awkward messages that acknowledged we were both alive, but didn't bridge the distance. Maybe someday he'd understand what his father had done. Maybe he'd recognize that the visible wealth had been a test he'd failed but could still reclaim through genuine growth. Maybe he'd realize my refusal to rescue him had been love. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd remain bitter, convinced I'd abandoned him. Never understanding that need and want are different. Either way, it was his journey, his lessons to learn or refuse, his life to build or waste. I'd done what I needed to do, honored my husband's plan, lived with integrity, refused to rob my son of growth that only comes through struggle. My consulting practice had evolved. I now ran a firm with 5 employees, all women who'd returned to tech after career breaks. We specialized in digital asset security, serving clients worldwide. The foundation had expanded to 3 cities, teaching thousands of young people about financial literacy. I'd also started dating, cautiously, a professor of computer science who appreciated both the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. Nothing serious yet, but the possibility felt like permission to imagine futures beyond remembering the past. The key to the garage sat on my desk at home. A paperweight now, but I kept it visible as a reminder. Locked doors can open, hidden wealth can be found, and forgotten identities can be reclaimed. My husband had spent 6 years planning this gift. He'd purchased Bitcoin when everyone mocked it. He'd maintained a garage in secret for over a decade. He'd written letters predicting our futures with uncanny accuracy. He'd structured an inheritance that tested both his son's character and his wife's resilience. And in doing all of that, he'd given me something I hadn't known I needed. Proof that I'd never stopped being brilliant. I'd just forgotten to look. The useless garage had contained the most valuable lesson, that we teach people who they are by what we trust them to understand. My husband had trusted me with complexity, with technology, with transformation. He'd trusted me to be smart enough, patient enough, capable enough. And in doing so, he'd reminded me to trust myself. As for my son, wherever he was in his journey, I'd given him something too. Space to become someone without the crutch of rescue. The opportunity to build character through consequence. The chance to discover his own strength. Whether he'd taken that gift or resented it, I might never know. But I'd learned that love isn't always about presence. Sometimes it's about absence, stepping back and trusting that people can grow if we stop preventing their struggles. The garage was empty now, except for echoes, but standing here, I could still feel the weight of that first moment, the confusion, the hurt, the sense of being dismissed. I'd thought the garage was evidence of my insignificance. Instead, it had been proof of my value all along. I locked the door one final time and walked to my car. Behind me, the building sat quiet and unremarkable. Just another structure holding no secrets, containing no fortune. But it had held something more important than Bitcoin or money or digital wealth. It had held the truth about who I'd always been, carefully preserved by a man who'd loved me enough to make me remember. And that truth had set me free.